What's happening, hunters? In this video, I'm going to be teaching you everything you need to know about the Gunlance shell types in Monster Hunter Wilds and what their pros and cons are. One thing I should mention is that I was testing this with my endgame gear kit on. I probably should have taken off my armor to test everything at base, but that being said, I did everything with this set on to keep things consistent, so that won't affect the actual data in this video. So without further ado, let's jump into it. I suppose we should start with the in-game descriptions of how shells work. There are three types of shells: normal, wide, and long. And the game info states that normal shells have the most capacity, wide shells are for more powerful shelling and wyvern fire attacks, and long shells make for more powerful Wyrmstake Cannon attacks. I tested a bunch of different weapons here, trying to keep the variables the same. I will show the weapons on screen when I am doing the test so that I don't have to read out the values for each one. So one thing the description did not state is that the Gunlances also have a certain shelling power. There is slightly weak, normal, and slightly strong. So we will see the differences with those first. So the normal one will be our baseline. With one uncharged shot, it hits for 10.8 damage, and a fully charged shot hits for 6 damage instances of 17.8 for a total of 106.8 damage. Next, we will look at slightly weak shells. This hits for 8.3 with a single shot, and the charged shot hits for 80 total damage. 4 shells hit 13.6 and 2 hit at 12.8. This means the normal charged shot is 33.5% stronger than the slightly weak shells, and the single shot is 30.1% stronger. So there is a bit of disparity here because a couple shots do hit for less damage on the slightly weak ones. So hypothetically, if every shell were to hit for 13.6, the total damage would have been 81.6, putting us at 30.88%. So for simplicity's sake, we could say that the normal shells are about 30% stronger than the slightly weak ones. So now let's look at the slightly strong ones. These hit for 13.3 with a single shot, and then 3 instances of 20.6 and 3 of 22, giving us a total of 127.8 damage. This is a 19.66% damage increase over the normal. And if those 20.6 shots hit for 22 instead, it would have been 23.6% more. And the difference in the single shot is 23.1%. So for simplicity, we can say that this is about 20% more damage than the normal shells, as the shell damage does vary from time to time. So slightly weak is basically 30% less damage than normal, and slightly strong is about 20% more damage than normal. And then if we compared the slightly strong to the slightly weak, it's a whopping 60% difference in damage. All these Gunlances have the same attack power, so what this tells me is that the slightly strong is by far the best way to go, especially if your build is centered around shelling. So the next question is, how much does attack power affect damage? Well, I took a Quemetris Gunlance, which was also normal with slightly strong, so that we can compare it to the last numbers. This one hits for 17.3 with a single shot, and a total damage of 171 from the charged shot. The single shot is 30% more, and the charged shot is 33.8% more. And the attack value went from 230 to 322, which is 40% more. So attack power doesn't quite scale 1 to 1, but it does directly correlate to harder hitting shells. So in theory, the best Gunlance for shelling would be the highest attack power with slightly strong shells. So now we get into the variety of the shells themselves. This is unfortunate as I could not compare apples to apples. I have 2 Gunlances with 299 attack power and another with 276, but they all have normal shell power. So we can compare very closely the differences in wide, normal, and long shells, so let's do that. Again, we will start with normal. The plus side to these is that they have more ammo, holding 6 in the magazine. The normal does 13.2 with a single shot and hits 6 instances for a total of 130.4 damage. Then we have the long shells. These only hold 3 in the magazine. They hit for 18.7 with a single shot and 83 with a charged shot. And keep in mind, this one does have slightly less power. Lastly, we have the wide shells. This one hits for 29.4 with a single shot and 99 with a charged shot. So the normal shells deal the most damage with the charged shot, which does make sense as they hold 6 in the magazine. But it also does take slightly longer to charge all 6 of those shots. So if you are trying to get in quick bursts of damage with fast shelling, then wide is great as you deal more damage per hit. But if you are focused on charged shelling, then normal will have the best total damage. It really comes down to preference and playstyle, but there is also an ease of use factor here. The long shells, as you may guess, are better from a distance. So here I will just show how far each shell can hit. As you can see, the long shells hit from the furthest range and the wide shells have very little range. The normal shells also have pretty short range, but they make up for it by having the most total damage in the burst. So again, all these shell types have trade-offs. So that is basically it for shelling. In my opinion, the best ones for a shelling based build would be wide with slightly strong shells. So next we have to look at the Wyvern Blast. The normal Gunlance hits for 264.5 damage. So then we have normal with slightly strong that hits for 295.3 damage. This is an 11.65% damage increase. And then we have the slightly weak shells which hit for 217.7. This is 21.5% less damage, and from slightly weak to slightly strong is a difference of 35.6%. So now we have the other shell types to look at. We have normal which hits for 329 damage. Then we have wide normal which hits for 380 damage, a 15.5% increase. And then we have long normal which hits for 307.5 damage, 7% less than normal. But this weapon does have a lower base attack, as I couldn't get one with the right shell types with a matching attack power. But not to fear, I have two with 414 attack that we can test to see if there is a difference between normal and long. So the normal hits for 436.5 damage, and then the long normal hits for the exact same damage. Hallelujah. So for the Wyvern Blast attack, only the wide shells hit harder. Normal and long hit for the same damage. So again, the best shell type is slightly strong and wide. This will give you the hardest hitting Wyvern Blasts. But the description said that Wyrmstake Cannons hit harder with long shells. So let's take a look at that. The normal Wyrmstake hits for 23.4, then a bunch of 5.6 ticks, and then a 41.1 explosion at the end. The wide type is the exact same way. The long one hits 21.7 at the start, and then a bunch of 5.2s, and then a blast of 54 at the end. But again, this one has lower attack power. So since we know wide and normal are equal, let's compare a normal to a long with equal attack power. So again, we have normal which hits for 60.6 damage, then a bunch of 7.6 ticks, and then an explosion of 53.6. Then with our long, slightly strong Wyrmstake, we hit for 31.8, and then a bunch of 10.6 ticks, and then an explosion of 86.9. So obviously the Wyrmstake is dealing more damage. If we take out the initial hit and just add up the ticks in the boom to the normal one, we get 9 ticks at 7.6, and an explosion of 53.6 for a total of 122 damage. For the long version, we get 9 ticks at 10.6, and an explosion of 86.9 for a total of 182.3 damage. This is a difference of 49.4%. So the Wyrmstake on the long shells is quite a bit stronger. But in terms of raw damage, it doesn't hold much of a candle compared to how hard shelling hits. So that's the Wyrmstake. How about the Drake Auger? The wide normal hits for a total of 253 damage, and then the normal hits for 271 damage. And I think the difference is honestly just that I got more 5.6 hits with the wide one. All the values were the same when I was hitting with both the wide and the normal. And then for the long shells, again, this weapon is at 276 attack, but even with a lower attack value, it ends with an explosion of 54, far higher than 41.1 for the others. So now let's look at the normal versus long with attack powers that match. The normal hits for a total of 434 damage, with the explosion at the end being 53.6. The long, slightly strong one hits for 416 total damage, but the explosion at the end is 86.9. The initial stab is quite a bit less at 35.7. So let's remove the stab from the equation. This would give us about 380.3. And if we subtract 54.2 from the first one, it would hit for 379.8. So the damage difference is basically negligible. So I thought maybe it was the affinity. So I found 2 Gunlances with equal attack, but one had affinity. I did a Wyrmstake full blast and they hit for the same damage numbers. So it seems affinity does not affect this. I also did the same thing with the Drake Auger, and again the damage numbers were essentially equal. So this leads me to believe that the Drake Auger doesn't get the benefit of long shells, just the Wyrmstake Blast, even though the Auger does use your Wyrmstake charge. The big boom at the end is more damage as we can see, but that is all the benefit you are really getting out of the Wyrmstake on the Drake Auger. So all in all, it's not very substantial. If anyone has an explanation for what's going on here, please help me out in the comments. Alright, so I went back and did some testing, and here's what I think's going on. So this one has 20% affinity, so you can see we're getting some 22.9% damage ticks, and these are adding up to give us more total damage from the Drake Auger, but then the explosion is 53.6. So now I will show the slightly long one. So here's the slightly long. You can see we're hitting like 17.4s and 13.9s, even though these do have the exact same attack power, but we're never getting those like bursts of 20 because this one has no affinity. But then we do get this big explosion at the end for 86.9. So the explosion at the end on the one that is normal is 53.6, and this one with slightly long shells is 86.9. So it buffs the explosion, but the actual drill part where you're getting all those damage ticks, I think that is affected by affinity. Again, please let me know down in the comments if you know that for sure. But yeah, that is what I think is going on, is the affinity is affecting the drill, but not the explosion. So the long shells will give you bigger explosion, but if you have affinity, you're going to get more damage ticks, as we saw with the normal one that has 20% affinity. So then the other thing I noticed while testing was that I did have white sharpness, and I think that is what is affecting the drill component. So you can see here we're hitting 18.4s and 14.9s, where before we had like some 20s and stuff, where we don't now that we don't have white sharpness. But then the explosion at the end is the same. So the explosion damage is what is affected by your shell type. So the long shell has better explosion. So if you're wanting to build into Drake Augers and stuff, I think you want something with high sharpness and likely high affinity. So the last thing I wanted to test was the efficiency of the shells for charging the Wyvern Blast. I tested charged and single shots. Here are the results. The normal took 36 shots and 2 fully charged shots. The normal, slightly strong, took 37 single shots and 2 fully charged shots. And the normal, slightly weak, took 38 shots and 2 fully charged shots. So basically negligible. Onto the wide and normal. The normal took 38 single shots and 2 fully charged shots. The long normal took 29 single shots and 4 fully charged shots. Though this was very close on the last one. And for wide normal, it charged in 16 single shots and only 3 charged shots. Lastly, there is a jewel called Magazine, which at level 2 can give you 1 more shell in the magazine, which will help you with your DPS a ton. It takes wide from 2 to 3, which is a 50% increase, long from 3 to 4, and normal from 5 to 6. And that is pretty much everything you need to know about Gunlance shells in Monster Hunter Wilds. I will have a video out soon talking about the different jewels that synergize very nicely with Gunlance, so be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss it when it goes live. But yeah, that is going to do it for this video. If you found it helpful, leave a like and I will catch you in the next one. Take care. Hey, if you're still here, then thanks so much for watching to the end. If you like what I do and you want to support me further, then consider becoming a channel member. You'll get your name featured on the end screen, custom badges, and other cool rewards. You can also join my community Discord if that interests you, and if you want to see me stream, be sure to follow me on Twitch at itstizzle7 where I stream semi-regularly. Those are linked in the description. Anyways, that's enough self-promotion. Thanks for watching. Take care.